name is Miss Janis, and I will be presenting this workshop on why soap is so effective against COVID-19. So, in order to understand why soap is effective, we first need to understand the structure of COVID-19 and of viruses in general. So, viruses are very, very simple structures. They are much smaller than a cell, so they are going to not have a lot of things in them. First of all, they need the genetic material. That is pretty essential. They have their genetic information encoded in either DNA or RNA, depends on the virus. Then they need something to protect that genetic material against the outside world. To do that, they have a protein shell, also called a capsid, which will transport the DNA or the RNA from one cell to the next. Then some viruses have a lipid envelope, which is a protective outer coat. It's another layer of protection from the outside. COVID-19 in particular has their genetic material as RNA, protein capsid, and a lipid envelope. So it has all three of these structures. So we have the RNA in the middle. In the case of COVID-19, is single-stranded RNA, so it's just one strand of RNA. The green thing is the protein capsid, which is the first protective layer. And then we have the lipid envelope, which has the proteins embedded in it, which allow the virus to go into a cell and infect that cell. The thing about viruses is that they're so simple that if one of their components is destroyed, the whole virus is going to fall apart. And that's going to be important later. For now, let's put this aside for a second and talk about polar and nonpolar molecules. You might have heard about this already, but in case that you haven't, polar molecules are the ones that are electrically charged. So for example, when we look at a water molecule, we know that it is H2O. It has two hydrogens and one oxygen. The oxygen has a slightly more negative charge than the two hydrogens. So when we look at the molecule as a whole, we will see that one side of the molecule will be slightly more negatively charged, and then the other side is going to be slightly more positively charged. So it has a charge, it's not neutral. When we look at other molecules, such as lipids or soap, we see that they are nonpolar. They don't have an electric charge. They are neutral. Now, it's worth noting, kind of as a side note, that in the case of both lipids and soap, they are composed of two things, the tail and the heads. The heads do have a little bit of electric charge, so they are polar, but the tails are much bigger. And since the tails are neutral and they are bigger, when we look at them as a molecule, as a whole, the nonpolar part is going to win. So we will consider them nonpolar molecules. So why is this important? There's this rule called like dissolves like. What that means is that if you put two molecules that are similar in this sense, they're going to produce a solution. So if you put a polar molecule with polar molecules, they're going to mix and make a solution. If you put nonpolar molecules with nonpolar molecules, they're also going to produce a solution. However, if you try to mix polar molecules with nonpolar molecules, it's just not going to work. There won't be a solution formed. So in the case of water, which is polar, and oil, which is nonpolar, it's a lipid, they will cause these two distinct layers that do not mix. So we know a few examples of lipids, which we have just said that they are nonpolar. We know that oil is a lipid. We know that things like butter and waxes are also lipids. So let's take into consideration this very, very schematic graph, right? So what this represents is oil. So we have olive oil in this case, hands that have olive oil in them. So we have oily hands. If we wash them with just water, we're not going to get rid of most of the oil. And that's because oil is a non-polar substance and water is a polar substance. So when we put them together, the water is not going to do a great job at making the oil go away. However, as we said before, soap is a non-polar substance. So when we wash our oily hands using soap and then we rinse it with water, the soap and the oil is going to mix together. And that mixture is going to be washed away using the water. So our hands will end up being clean. What is happening here is a mixture. So the oil molecules are mixing with the soap molecules. And because they are mixing, they are not as stuck to our hands. They are able to go away while we wash them. Now let's bring back that diagram that we set aside for the moment. So this is COVID-19, right? We talked about how it has the RNA single strand in the middle, then we have the protein capsid, and then we have the lipid envelope around it. Lipid envelope is kind of the same as oily hands, so let's substitute that in our graphs. So now instead of having oily hands, we have this virus that has a lipid coat around them. So it has a lipid molecules creating that outer coat. When we put them with just water, it's not the same thing, so the virus is going to be pretty much unaffected. However, when we put the virus with soap, so that nonpolar coat gets into contact with the nonpolar soap molecules, we find that the virus is destroyed. Now, what is happening here is that because they are both nonpolar, the soap molecules is going to kind of mix with the lipid envelope. And when it mixes with the lipid envelope, it destroys it. And as we said before, viruses are fragile in the sense of if one of their parts is destroyed, the whole virus cannot work anymore. So by disrupting the outer coat with the soap molecules, we will get rid of the virus completely. And that is why soap is so effective in our fight against COVID-19. So, very important skill to have is to be able to wash our hands properly. Now, we know how to wash our hands. We've been doing it forever. However, do you use the 6 hand shapes that you should be using to be able to wash your hands? In order to learn those, the activity after this workshop is going to be to learn a TikTok dance on hand washing. So we're going to learn together how to wash your hands in a more fun way. If you are uncomfortable dancing in front of a camera, you can always just share a video of you washing your hands with no dancing and no music. Just use the appropriate hand shapes to make sure that you're getting rid of any possible virus molecules that are in your hands. Have fun!